Hello. Good afternoon, respected panel members and everyone. On behalf of Praxis, the Economics and the Public Policy Club of IIFT Delhi, and the IIFT Economic Society, I welcome you all to our flagship event, the Post-Budget Panel Discussion. It has always been our endeavor to disseminate information regarding the public policies and the economic matters to our IIFT Delhi and to the wider audience. Today, we have gathered here to get insights into the interim budget that our Union Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharamanji, unveiled on 1st Feb 2024 from our esteemed panel members. Let me introduce our panel members to you all. We have Mr. Ajay Srivastava, sir. He is a former Indian Trade Service officer from the 1989 batch. He was also a part of India's WTO and FTA negotiating teams. He also served as Additional Director General Foreign Trade. He has recently founded GTRI, that is Global Trade Research Initiative, a research group that focused on the trade, technology, and the climate change. Second, we have Professor Soumen Chattopadhyay, sir, a seasoned economist who was formerly with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and currently a highly experienced faculty member at JNU. He has also been to IIFT in the past as a visiting faculty. We also have Ms. Mitali Gaur, ma'am. She did her MSc in Economics from London School of Economics and Political Science. She also served Asian Development Bank, World Bank, and also advised to the United Nations. Currently, ma'am is the founder of the Nicor Associates also. we have Mr. Abhishek Sudke sir. He has served as the policy and the partnership officer at the G20 Sherpa's office. Currently, Abhishek sir is the founder and CEO of the project Statecraft. Finally, we have our own esteemed professor, Dr. Biswajit Nag sir. Sir is a specialist in the international business analysis, both at the macro and the strategic levels. Sir has also advised a large number of international agencies on the various policy issues related to international trade and investment. So with the elections to the Lok Sabha scheduled this year, the government has only presented the interim budget this year. Nevertheless, it is an important milestone as it marks the policy continuity of the incumbent government, as it sticks to the fiscal consolidation, prioritizing the capital expenditure over the revenue expenditure, and underline the government's commitment to pursuing an export-led economic policy, even as recessionary clouds are looming over the major Western economies. It would be interesting to watch how India would navigate this string of challenges and opportunities at the global stage. And this budget is important to understand the government's vision for the India's future. I hope you all will get great learning from the today's discussion, and we wish it to be a highly interactive session. Thank you. You wish.
Okay, so at the outset, I'd like to thank Praxis and IES, the two clubs, one from MBA and another from MA Economy, to organize this particular program. This is not only just important for IIFT, it's also an important gesture. Why I'm telling you why. See here, by doing these things, you as a student giving importance on the convergence of issues. Now, economics and business are having a symbiotic relation. So this is a kind of an indicator that in IIFT, actually, we give huge importance of this particular concept. And then I'd like to thank all the panelists. So you have got their introduction. I do not need to go much more in details, but I like to say a few words to set the kind of a tone of the discussion. As it has been already been told that this is interim budget, and many people may think that this is an election budget. Many people may think that there is not much there in the budget. So the full budget will be coming after the new government will take their power. However, budget, even being a yearly ritual, which is basically providing certain plans of the government, one important thing is from the budget, actually, we can find out the intent, the short term and the long term both. So few features which are very, very evident from the government's outlook that they would like to push the economy through infrastructure growth, as you have seen. They would like to contain the deficit, like to focus on revenues, and also would like to reduce the borrowing. Right. So all these will be having a macroeconomic situation. So we have macroeconomists who would like to take his views on this. And then if you look at from the business side, this infrastructure growth, as well as focus on logistics and focus on some of the schemes like PLI and others that how actually incentivizing the Indian industry to the next level are also very important. Third thing, perhaps many of you have noticed directly or indirectly, as we know in the literature, there is always a contradiction between growth and development, and all governments actually face challenges how to bring balance. So whether in this particular budget, the government has really made an attempt to bring the balance between these two. One side, we have huge growth focus, as I just said, from the infrastructure to logistics and other aspects. At the same time, there is a lot of focus on the social issues. Okay, so for example, focus on gender, focus on employment generation, focus on on other aspects like climate change. So these are important. So I'd like to go to our panelists to looking into this particular aspects and what we can expect out of it. Trade is also an important thing. So trade cannot be separated from the budget also. Sometimes from the infrastructure, sometimes from the policy incentives, sometimes from the distant things. For example, any corrections in the corporate tax or income tax can have an impact on trade as well. So I'd like to go back to our panelists to understand. So how we'll go about it, I think we'll have roughly 40 minutes. So we can divide it for 40 minutes this way, that 4 of you take 8 minutes each, and give your one, and then maybe start with the question. So this question for all of you, and then actually students, they have questions. And the good question answer session is basically the spirit of any good discussion. So let me just talk to you. That's it. Ajay, you can say a few words.
Oh, too much of clapping. So good afternoon, all. So as now you're all aware that Honorable SM has said that there will be full budget only in July, and she only presented the vote on account. She presented some data about where the country is going. So 2-3 key data points are there. We'll just mention those points and then we move forward. She mentioned that our this year's growth will be exceeding 7%, which is very good considering the growths in most of the developed countries. They are not even half of this, and other geopolitical challenges. Then she said that our FDI during years when BJP came 2014 to present is about $600 billion, and which is much more than it was in the previous regime. And third, she mentioned that there will be no change in the tax rates. So whatever happens will happen in July. So we pick up from these and go further. I don't want to discuss routine things. We'll try to discuss some counterintuitive things. And my basic aim is for you to force you to think. Don't trust all what is written in the newspapers, on TV, discussions, because most of the people who are doing those writings, they are motivated writers. Either they're getting paid to show a certain kind of pictures. So you are all educated, you should apply your mind on everything. So we'll take one by one some random things and then we'll expect some questions from you on this contradicting me. I'm very happy. So first about, we say we are the 5th largest economy, will become the 3rd largest economy. So much of pride for us. So is GDP a good measure? You all know by this, if we are 140 crore people, everybody earns just 1 rupee, it becomes 140 crores. And another country, one person earns 100 crore, we say we are bigger than that person. Not the case, because the person earning 1 rupee doesn't have any quality of life. So we should focus not only on per capita income, because if we have Ambanis and Adanis, they share most of the income. Top 5%, they share more than 30% of the income. Then for the rest, PCI per capita income may look even higher, but for real bottom people, it may be even 1/3 of the PCI in some cases. So while taking a lot of pride that country will be moving from 5th place to 3rd place, apply your mind. What happens, like Mahatma Gandhi always said this, that if I have to take any decision, I keep the most disadvantaged person of the country in my mind before taking it. If it's going to help him, then only that's good for me. Just random thoughts. Second, tax rates. Are we paying too much tax, too less tax? Income tax rate roughly about 30%, GST 18 to 20%. So 50 to 55% is the basic tax most of us pay. Is this less or more? They say in European countries the tax is about 55%. So we are okay with that because that's the world standard. In many cases it's less, but European countries less is that. Say for Sweden, Norway, all these is tax rate is 55 to 60%. But the difference, we should always appreciate that. When they pay tax, they get something return. They get free high quality education, free high quality healthcare, free water, great AQI in the air. What we get? We have hospitals, schools, everything. But you and me, people with some earnings cannot afford to go there. We will not like the quality. You have to spend from your own pocket. That's not the case in those countries. So I went to Japan, and like here, you say that hospital is good, this doctor is good. Japan, they have hundreds of hospitals. You go to one hospital, go to 10 hospitals, they will, it's almost standardized medication. So we have to learn a lot. So I say we should stop taking false pride in many things. I mean, just keep your thinking gear on. Don't just get led astray by the things. So now for the past 3-4 years, one of the big themes and almost all the government departments are busy in making vision documents for not next 5 years, not next 10 years, but 2047. So we are told that we are lucky to be in the Amrit Kal. Today is the Amrit Kal. From now on to 47 is Amrit Kal. And we should all endeavor to make the country developed. So I'll not say how to do those things. You all know those things are reading everywhere. But let's understand through some counterintuitive examples what we should not do. What we should do, everybody tells, but what should we not do? So first come to economy, and economy is agriculture, manufacturing, and agriculture industry and services. So I'll start with the agriculture. Just one example. We are the largest exporter of rice. 40% of global exports by us. Is it good? China's rice productivity is much higher than India. They can export. They don't export because 1 kg of rice export means exporting about 1500 liters of water. It's a water export. We get 25 to 30 rupees for 1 kg in export income, but we export that much water. How that becomes sustainable? Because we provide free electricity. It's fine. Free is fine. But free electricity, how it's used? We suck the water from the ground. And the water tables in Punjab has gone to 150 to 200 meters and worse in some cases. There is no water. And during our lifetimes, we'll see in next 10, 15 years what happens. So sometimes I shudder. In fact, my daughter is of your ages and she says that I'm being overtly critical on this. But if you read history, those of you who are preparing for civil services must have read about Indus Valley civilization. It was a flourishing civilization, the same place, Punjab and all those. It disappeared. How? They say because of climate change, river changed the course. Here, the same thing is going to happen in our lifetimes only. You see, in 20, 30 years, water is not there. So, So, point is, we should stop unsustainable practices. Whatever electoral gains are there, government will lose the elections, but somebody will have to take call. Today is the option. Tomorrow there will be no option. So, about the agriculture. So, I'll not talk about how to develop, but some counterpoints. Now, let me talk something about manufacturing. So, positive things first. How a small partnership for developing a country, we don't need to do so many things at a policy level. Even small leverage things can do wonders. So one example is Maruti Suzuki. We had, when we were young, you were not born at that point of time. Then we had only 2 cars, Ambassador and Fiat, and only 2 cars were there. Then came Sanjay Gandhi, son of Indira Gandhi. He started Maruti, and Suzuki was chosen for technology and other partnerships. And it created wonders. The car was priced 40,000 rupees at that point of time. And in the production started in 1983. And by 1995, the productivity of entire auto sector, not only Maruti Suzuki, but entire of country's auto sector went up by 250% productivity. So one good big experiment, it elevates everybody. We need fewer but bigger such experiments in most of the sectors. The good point. Now, you must have heard of Nokia story. You know, you are reading almost every day, newspapers are talking about how our mobile phones are doing so good. And indeed, they are doing so good. $7 billion last year export. This year jumped to 14, just double in 1 year. So it's a credit. They say PLI is doing wonders. But I recall in 2006, Nokia came to India. They started a plant in Sri Perumbudur. They opened a SEZ there. And they bought their component manufacturers, almost all the component manufacturers. They started manufacturing everything, all parts of mobile phones there, and exporting. In next 5-6 years, the exports risen to $2 billion. That was unthinkable, from zero to $2 billion in 5-6 years. But then you should know these stories in details. Then what happened? Then somebody did not like this. These things again will happen in our country. They keep on happening. Somebody did not like it. So they were started being harassed. First by politicians of the state. Through, they say, the workers, we want canteen contract. It started with canteen contract. And then there was fights, workers, unions. And then Tamil Nadu State Department's, Sales State Department, they say, okay, you have manufactured these many mobile phones, but you have not paid us sales tax. So Nokia said, it's not due because we have exported these, and these are shipping bills proof of the exports. They say, no, we don't understand this. You produce, so you have to pay. And the clear rule is that if you're exporting, tax is not to be paid. So it continued for 3-4 years. They had to go to local courts. They lost the case. They went to Madras High Court, which gave verdict in their favor. So Nokia were relaxed. But again, the next year, a 15,000 crore tax notice came from income tax. I have 2 more minutes. Please tell me. Income tax department. So this time Nokia bought the software used in that Nokia phones from its parent in Finland. And income tax say you have to pay tax on royalty. They say it's not a royalty. So it was India, Finland, double tax avoidance treaty, some clause. And ultimately, income tax issued notice and attached their assets, and Nokia was shut. People have written a lot about this case. People suspect that it may be an international conspiracy. Gainer was only China. We started making in India. After that, our mobile phone story stopped. We started importing all the mobile from China. And the Nokia story, why I'm telling you is that you should compare. I want you to compare. Nokia story was far better than the current story. Their export was only 2 billion. Today is 14 billion. But I say that was better because why? Today, Apple is making phones with 95% imported inputs. If suppose tomorrow China wants to act prompt, it stops supply of one small component, your entire industry goes. We're totally dependent on them. Earlier we were not. So I say, I am telling you all these things just to say, don't trust everything. Just apply your brain cells on this. So then about the services sector. Services, from Raghuram Rajan to everybody say it's such a glamorous sector. India is not fit for manufacturing. We should all focus on services. But what is service sector? If we forget about this glamorous things like fintech and IT, together they provide not more than 50 lakh jobs. Service sector is 20 crores jobs. My calculation says that people, if we remove the top 5% in terms of numbers of jobs, people in service sector, they are worse than the people in agriculture. They get less money than the people in the agriculture sector contain. This fact is not highlighted anywhere, but you can do your own calculations. So service sector, everybody says IT doing so good, so our eyes are closed, brain is closed. Okay, we are great in service sector. No, service sector is people on the street. This vegetable vendor is service sector. Entire shops on all across the country on roads, these motor mechanics, everybody is service sector. All these dhabas, their service sector, real service, they provide all the jobs. Their fate is worse than the farmers. So I'm not criticizing, I'm asking you to put your blinkers on only. Okay. Then I think one more minute. Sure. Okay, grace time. Then what to say? Last minute, so I should not say. Last minute. Okay. Climate change. Many of you must be doing dissertations, all those things. So I thought I don't know anything about climate change. So I started reading for the past 1 year. I was reading deeply. I'm also an engineer, like most of you. So I went into technical part, not on the economics part. And I discovered what they are saying is fossil fuels are bad. We know they are bad because they are leading to emission of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, which is linked to temperature increase. And because of that, we should cut the use of fossil fuel. And the only solution is use solar and wind like renewable energy. Now, solar and wind, fine. Up to 20-30%, you can supply to the grid. It's very fine. All of us are doing that. We should do. But can solar when solar totally replace fossil fuel like natural gas or coal? No. No grid can support those things. They are intermittent, low energy quality things. So the solution is you produce solar energy and then convert into green hydrogen for carrying it. But that requires refrigerated containers. So cost becomes doubles, triples, 4 times. So we were discussing this Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism. And the solution we are discussing is, okay, Tata Steel, okay, for exporting to Europe, you make a green steel, the price will be 3x. And for exporting rest of the world, same plant, make black steel, where the price will be X only. So I say these things have not been talked in the media, and they are very common sense. So my only intention, since budget nothing much was there to talk, just to force you not to trust everything you hear or read, because most of the people are paid for writing in that style. Thank you very much.
Okay, so without losing time,
Yeah, भैया, one problem, please. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
And I'll borrow that. No, I have a problem. I can't stand in one place. How are we doing, guys? Are we awake?
Full size, full.
You coffee नहीं है? What happened with the life in coffee in the bottle? Nothing. It's an Italian bottle. Still, our coffee is still affordable. Maybe after a couple of years because climate change, therefore we can't have coffee, chocolate after a few years. But who's planning for it? No one. No one's planning for it. So, what do I really want to talk about in the conversation I have? I want to give you an overview, of course, and the Goal Associate, we do the annual budget analysis of the announcement. We focus on infrastructure, we focus on gender, which is obviously that's what we do. And then we also focus now increasingly on climate change, sustainability, and everything. But the biggest question really becomes with this entire budget is what do we make there has been so much discussion about this entire budget. I feel like I have spoken more about it than the financial budget. Let's see what's going on. It's probably because everyone is looking for clues on what happens in July. And why is that? When you sort of get it, why is it that we're trying to look for clues in this topic? Anyone wants to just speak again? Okay, so we have all individuals, but we can still talk. Any problem? Why are we so much into this budget relative to voter account? The reason why we are looking into this topic so much is because actually need a policy direction, right, that will be taken by the new government, which, we expect will come into that, will be set by the Indian. When we look at some of the focus areas of the Italian budget, be it Garib, be it Luga, be it Mahila, be it, any of the other inclusive, growth groups, it becomes important to sort of understand that these are increasingly recognized as marginalized groups. And finally, it has been a recognized as maybe the benefits of the growth that have happened over the last 10 years, if you want to believe white papers, and 20 years, if you want to believe both the black and white papers, are not accumulating to certain business. And I think that as citizens we are very lucky to be in an environment where we are discussing growth, where we are discussing the, actual visibility of the government in terms of economics and not in terms of other political, priorities. So for me, some of the things that to be proud of, and very on budget day, I was telling Sarojini was coming in. It's exhausting for me because I started following on with some new patterns, and then I finished basically at midnight with 14 later. Generally, this year was crazy. And I was not expecting it because I was only not waiting for 6 patterns. And on the day, it was like everyone is calling. You, because with my IIFT Auditorium, it was basically one woman and we got the panel. So I was thinking down and wondering because I was the only person who stuck my neck out in a lot of things budget discussions. And I was saying, you know what? The budget from Ministry of the New and Energy is going to it. And no one believes it. So I was thinking because when we come to look at the housing commitment that we have to do, post cost of the post the discussions that have happened at the world. So essential for India to be investing more and more in renewable energy. I mean, it's not or renewable energy, like wind power, solar power, any other form, the power plant, which has been over several times. That is how we can continue to safeguard your growth in an era where coffee might become unaffordable. And then after that, of course, the Ministry of Rural Development increased by 12%. Now, this was super interesting for me. Have any of you remember the discussions from last year? Or were you too young to be looking at the budget at that time? Are you still too young to be looking at the budget? Probably last year at that time. But no, so last year when we looked at the budget, Narega was one scheme that was slashed brutally. Like it lost 25,000 crores in 1 year in its allocation, went from around 85,000 in 2020, 122 to 60,000 in 22-23, and it was brutal. This year, it's back to 85,000. So again, a 12% increase in Narega. Why is that important? Because Narega is the only social welfare scheme that in the last 5-7 years, we have seen has got a consistently high allocation throughout. And it's also notable that it's a scheme that was so associated closely with the previous government, and yet this government, I think to its credit, has come and said, it's a good scheme, we're going to make sure we keep on using this scheme well and funding it. And in fact, they have brought in, more and more technology, because now Aadhaar-enabled work job cards have to be taken for securing Narega payments. I mean, the issues with that is separate, but at least it's been done to reduce the. Of course, apart from that, other announcements, I would say, increases not so notable. What I found interesting was the Ministry of Civil Aviation budget falling by 30%. I mean, You've literally just completed the sale of Air India. Now you probably have some cash in the civil aviation ministry and you should be investing in more airport upgrades. But so then why is it that the civil aviation, target falls? It's because of public-private partnership. I think it's a great barometer of success when your civil aviation ministry or any infrastructure ministry is able to bring on private sector funding, off balance sheet funding instead of on balance sheet funding through the budget. And if you look at the budget for the road transport and highway industry, the off balance sheet financing which comes from private sector, which comes from NHAI, is actually almost the same size as the budget itself for the ministry because they are able to leverage private sector funding. And in fact, to the extent that they literally tell World Bank, "मुझे आपका पैसा नहीं चाहिए." I have been on an event where Mr. Gadkari stood on the panel and said, "You, तुम्हारा पैसा नहीं चाहिए." Literally, it's in this tone, and it was fantastic. Love it. Please don't take the debt financing. So this is not very visible, sorry, for the small font size. I will pull up my interns. Many of you could be my future interns, so please note this. Don't make it like this. But some of the schemes that have, of course, like benefited a lot. PM Awas Yojana still continues to be high on the list and also like a great thing. And then we can also see that other schemes like the PM Shri is again a scheme that has like grown a lot because this is almost like a new scheme. Now again, we don't yet know what the contours of the PM Shri are going to be, but we are going to find more and more investment in PM Shri schools. So that's something to look for in the full budget. Now, where does the budget go? Which ministry? Ministry of Finance takes about 40% because a lot of the centrally sponsored schemes like SCMA, etc. are all run through the Finance Ministry. Also, the direct benefit transfer which are run through the Finance Ministry. And then, interestingly, obviously, the cash, the council will run the ministry after Finance, no salary benefit. Why? Because you have a lot of research, expenditure, and of course, a lot of capital expenditure that happens there. But one thing I'm hearing more and more, and I was actually interacting with a friend of mine, he's the chief economist to the CM of the Khan, and him to that. And he said, I'm going to increase the capital to revenue ratios. You'll see it next week when we bring our budget. A lot of states are speaking this language. And this language was not being spoken before. There was this whole minimization of revenue expense. Of course, we had a problem for many decades. Our revenue expenditure has been way too high. Capital expenditure was not being prioritized. In fact, it was being crowded out by revenue expenditure. But now it's almost like revenue to karna hi nahi. There's capital currency almost. That's also a little bit of a challenge because a lot of your social sector schemes are revenue expenditure. So somewhere I think we have to have a little bit of a balance, but for the next 5 to 10 years, I expect that the capital to revenue ratios will start to change. And we will come to a point where it's almost 50-50, and we were at a point where 70-40 revenue was 70%. So in the coming, I would say, decade, we'll definitely reach a 50-50 phase because that's a target that has been given to the finance ministry. These are our 4 groups. Gyan, the Gyan budget, Gyan will be our group. So, of course, very important, we continue to have poverty in this country. No matter how much we may have eradicated multidimensional poverty according to Dr. Sujit Bhalla's analysis, we continue to have poverty in this country. And also, I don't know, I believe that, if we have, poverty is a relative concept, right? You all students of economics, some of you. So, what is the poverty line in the country? It was set in 2011-12. Been 20 years. Why do we not have a new poverty line in this country? So I am hoping that in the next leap towards Viksit Bharat, we have to redefine what is poverty. Before saying that, yes, we have eradicated a lot of the multidimensional poverty and the entire push for multidimensional poverty is a way of redefining poverty. But we should read the poverty line and then say we have to reduce poverty. And then of course, apart from that, there is then there is of course Annadata, which is a very important component. Farmers are still 50% of our workforce. 75% of working women in this country are farmers or farm laborers. Actually, just basically farm laborers. So the farm sector still very, very important. And Yuva, I don't know how this is going to work because there is a lot of emphasis on infrastructure development again in terms of IITs, IIMs. But the Skill India mission usually is a little bit of rejuvenation, and I think that's what I was thinking we need to look forward to in July. Because the Skill India mission, we have been also discussing with several ministries with like it's important to bring in more and more topics and more sectors into it. And Nari, my favorite topic, obviously. These are some of the good announcements. We know that a lot of women's career adverts are there. What we don't know in the government is not said is that they don't actually join workforce. They will do it and go and do their PhD and sorry, have to do other things like living out of the house. And then the 30 crore Mudra Yojana, this is a very good data point, and I have actually spoken to women who have taken a Mudra Yojana loan. They are benefiting from it, so this is generally a good, scheme and beneficial scheme. And the Lakshmati degree concept I love, genuinely love it. Why? You know what is the per capita income of India in rupees today? 1,50,000 $2,000, so somewhere around 85,000 rupees a year. If you take Lakshmati degree, then you're essentially saying that let's bring 3 crore women to the same level as the average per capita income of the country, or little bit ahead. This is a really powerful concept, right? Because we're basically talking about women's financial empowerment in a way that you're taking them ahead of the per capita average income of the country, and they're much more than that at this point. So I'm going to end with just one chart. Sorry, you can read all of this on our website. So this is the favorite chart I have. These are also legible, so good job team. See, they do something right also. So as you can see, the general budget as a percentage of the total expenditure. This is a very powerful statement because, and we have the full analysis has been published in full, so you can catch up full analysis of the gender budget in full. But essentially, if you look at the overall data starting from 2005-6, which is when the gender budget started getting published, it's a separate statement 13 that comes out as a part of the budget. It's hovered between like 3% to 5% every year. This is the first year, first non-COVID, non-emergency, no, real pressure year, where it's gone beyond 6%, and it's now at 6.5. So again, this was a prediction I got wrong because I was saying that this year it should go to 10% of the budget. I was being very hopeful, but we reached 6.5, which is great. We need more and more allocations towards the gender budget. It's one thing to say Nari Shakti, it's another thing to put money behind Nari Shakti. So of course you need a lot of public sector investment, complemented by private sector, of course, for women empowerment, for the schemes that promote women empowerment. But this is one thing that helps us in understanding that how much are you actually investing in women empowerment. So we are investing 6.5% of our budget in women empowerment, and this is across all streams. 38 ministries report on the gender budget. Ideally, all are supposed to report, but at this point in time, we've managed to increase it from 14 in 2005 to 38. So more than double this. And we have to keep on advocating for more and more resources in the budget. So with that, thank you so much, and of course happy to take questions.
So,
Hi, very good afternoon to everybody here. Thank you so much for coming in to listen to us. And I think as everybody here is spoken, they like to know more about the broader economics, the broader budget aspects. I'm here. I'm here to give a young person's perspective to the Indian budget and to really look at what are the indications that serve as reference. They said that this is a very indicative budget. And I don't think anything can be more indicative or rather in government terms, more aspirational than talking about young people's role in the budget and what does the budget really have for young people. So to start off with, I think there are four major things that I want to address to what I'm going to do. So firstly, it's about clarity. As every different family has been, climate change is the biggest threat that exists for our generation and for our world as we see it today. Can someone very quickly tell me what is it in 6 years that's extremely important for us as young people? Anybody?
jobs.
So in exactly 6 years, there is something crucial. Yes. SDG goals, exactly. So I don't think any of us are old enough to remember what happened, that there was something called the Millennium. So there was these Millennium Development Goals, following which we had the Sustainable Development Goals. And there really needs to be a conversation about what happens after 2030. And we need to have this conversation, right? And we need to have this conversation because unless we do, there isn't really a lot that might change in the coming years. So something which I really like about this budget.
Abhishek, continue. I have the same role.
Okay, sorry for the brief break. But what I really like, or what this budget really indicates for me as a young person, is those opportunities and the vast opportunities that I see around the horizon. I think when we talk about all the very specific initiatives around infrastructure, around deep tech, around climate change initiatives, there is that sense that all of us need to be aspirational in one way, and that is something which I really like about this current government. Can anybody tell me what was the major tagline with which the government came to power back in 2019? There were a total of 6 words, and they became very popular. Start with Sabka. There's something else that got added to it this year. Does anybody know? There was one more thing that was added to it this year. My bad. I forgot about the short one. Anybody knows what was it that was added? Yeah, Sabka Prayas, right? And this is something which has been stressed by almost everybody. Take Prime Minister, take the Finance Minister, take the RBI governor. Right? There was a monetary policy statement that came out a couple of days ago. And even there, we were talking about what Sabka Prayas really means. And I think when we are a country which has probably the greatest demographic dividend in the entire world, and we are living in a country which, for all the faults of GDP as a concept, is doing really well. Like, that's the metric that we really need to look at. And the growth is something which we are seeing. Now, there are very specific things in the budget that I would like to pick at and really talk about. Firstly, on climate change. We are very close to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We are 5 years old. And this was something that we stressed a lot at G20 as well, that we are at the halfway point to Agenda 2030. And if anything, the Sustainable Development Goals or our targets to it have reversed over the COVID years, globally speaking. And that is something which we really have to address, and climate change becomes extremely important over there. So this government, what I like about them is there's a lot of pro-green policies coming out not just in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of wealth. Now, there is a very important US policy which came out in the last couple of years, which is, for all intents and purposes, boosted American growth over the past couple of years. Does anybody know? Inflation Reduction Act. We had something similar, but we've been doing that for a couple of years before that. It's called the performance linked incentives. So PLI in the renewable sector is very similar to what IRA does today. IRA is 50% of the billions of dollars of investment is going as tax breaks and incentives to companies in the renewable sector. At the same time, if you look at Europe, Europe is doing something very similar as well. Now, these countries, which for all our historical lessons have been the major proponents of free trade, of not being protectionist in nature, there is something changing. And I think the world as a whole is looking inwards. And that needs to create opportunities because the broader narrative or economics as we understand today only tells us one thing, that the growth will happen when globalization happens. Now, when we are looking at a reality of today where such geopolitical tensions exist, when climate change is really going to put stress on countries taking care of their own citizens as the years come along, what is it that we really need to do to create opportunities without the same kind of globalization that we saw over the past few years? And that's a major question that we need to be asking in the aftermath of this budget. So, is this budget really indicative of the realities that we will face post 2030? Because as per the words of the finance minister, we are looking at a budget for 2047. That this is an aspirational indicative budget for 2047. So something very interesting that I really like from this budget, and that I think we are doing very different in terms of climate change, is we are taking a whole of the economy and whole of society approach to climate change. And nobody around the world is doing it. You know, you look at China. China has, over the past few years, China's renewable sector has grown immensely. Today, Delhi roads have BYD. Does anybody know what BYD is? Yes, it's a massive Chinese electric car company, which, by the way, just bought its own cruise line just to export electric vehicles out of China to the rest of the world. So, over the years, historically, the kind of power that oil has, we are going to see that happening with critical minerals and with finished goods, because the critical minerals around electric vehicles, say lithium, for example, just having lithium mines isn't going to take you a lot of distance. You need to have the manufacturing capacity, you need to have the people, you need to have the education system, you need to have the right kind of investment, R&D, which can truly propel that sector forward. Today, we keep talking about there is a massive green hydrogen mission that is coming together. But to really make it possible, to really achieve the kind of targets around green hydrogen that we are talking about, there needs to be a lot of streamlining that needs to happen on a global level. Because over the past year, if you look at the investments in climate change, the public sector investments are extremely behind what we truly need for an energy transition. Just in India alone, we secured around $500 billion of investments for climate, if I'm not wrong, and we need almost 6 trillion. So, like that's some figures, right? We are extremely behind, and as we know, GDP as a construct will not allow us to go beyond that. So, where is the money going to come from? Anybody? Does anybody know? In the private sector, right? So the private sector would have to crowd in the funding. So crowding in of finance is something that we keep talking about when we discuss climate change. And that private sector funding would only come in if you really have an economy that is prepared to accept that private sector funding and do something. Like if you're running a private corporation, why would you put your money or why would you set up shop in an area that is not safe? In an area that is not going to give you employment to run that shop in the future, or it is not going to give you the right kind of permission to set up shop. So these things become extremely important when you're talking about climate change, because eventually, like at the end of the day, if there's a financial facility which is going to come to India, we really want to make sure that something like what happened to Nokia, for example, doesn't happen again. Like that was, I think, one of the big takeaways that I had from this story when Sir was talking about the nuclear story in Tamil Nadu, was that why could government do that? Why could the state government do that? And really, what was the central government doing at the time? If there were so many jobs that were going to go away, then there should have been something, there should be some measure. If not corrective at the time, at least, in retrospect, because it is a lot of different measures. And that really didn't happen until GST came to picture, right? Now, all of you being students of economics, I think realize the importance of a unified tax system for an entire country, how important it becomes for the private sector to do it. But again, we are a democracy, we are a federal democracy at that. We aren't China, which can immediately turn around and say, you know what, you can start putting in money here. We need to take into consideration the realities that occur in the states as well. This is why the federal aspect, which is being heavily debated, heavily contested in the public today, it becomes extremely important. So I think as young people, you would really have to assess every fact of this entire picture just around climate change to really understand what are the opportunities that exist for you as a young person and what is it that you would have to do moving forward. The other aspect that I want to touch upon, except climate change, and is sort of an enabler of these things, is education. Does anybody know when was the education policy? When did we have an education policy before 2010? A national education policy. Yeah, that was quite a while ago. There were two guesses. So even I don't. It was probably before I was born. I'm really not sure. But when the National Education Policy 2020 came around, I think there was again that aspiration which was given. Sadly, over the past few years, implementation of the National Education Policy is something which is extremely slow. For me, as a founder of Project Future, we work actively in education and in research. What we've been trying to do is promote better education, quality education, and research among young people in schools and in colleges. But that is not something which is really picked up. I think that is where, when man said that more IITs and more of these institutions that are going to really work or not, because there are some inherent problems with the education system as it is today. When we had the services sector boom, for example, a lot of Indians credited the services sector for having brought image into the day-to-day of every Indian that was present. And it really happened. But is that truly enough? China did the very same thing that we did with services manufacturing. And every time there is a massive crisis, they have issues coming in. Now, with services, sure, we have taken longer and short-term geopolitical issues or export-related issues will really not hamper our services sector. But the services sector itself is changing. You have massive changes in terms of data sciences, in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of application of machine learning, in terms of just emerging technologies which utilize combination of these solutions together. And that as a whole is called deep tech. If you all know. Now, deep tech got a massive mention in the budget this year as well, where they announced 1 lakh corpus for R&D around deep tech. Now, deep tech again becomes extremely important for engineers that are studying in educational institutions today, because what Sir said was extremely correct. Engineers who the amount of engineers we see. For example, I'm an engineer, by the way, just for the reference. I was in college because engineering really doesn't have great jobs in it. And so was right, engineering doesn't have great jobs in it, but that is not the case globally. In India, that is the case. Now, that is because in the services sector, we really haven't been able to vertically grow or vertically upgrade our services sector because of the lack of education, lack of workforce, which is truly ready for that. And for that, we really need some real changes that happen in our education system. And not just in, say, engineering, so that's one example. But as a whole, as a society, as an education system, that is something which we really need to look at. And that means better pedagogy. That means better, more interconnected, more involved young people who really care about what is going on right now. Otherwise, the way we have looked at the demographic patterns around the world, India is really not going to, like, the demographic dividend that we keep referring to, the government keeps referring to, will turn into a youth bulge. and we really wouldn't be able to do anything about it unless we start making those changes in our education system, in our skilling programs, in our day-to-day society, like be it around stereotyping and be it around inclusivity. I think these are some of the values that as a society, we need to invite in the young people who are going to be the drafters of the goals that come after 2030. Because it will be us who will be writing, for all we know, it will be us who will be working to implement those goals. It will be us who will be probably working with the government or even advising the government on how do we do better until 2047. So maybe while we are talking about America or about 2047, young people really need to start asking what happens after 2030, because that's still a big question for all of us. Thank you. Very happy for questions.
Thanks, sir, for your time. So now.
So, to begin with, I must express my gratitude to Praxis, to you all and IIFT in particular for giving me the opportunity to be here and to listen to the panelists. I will focus on two things. One is on fiscal consolidation in the budget and the vision of Viksit Bharat development. Before we discuss budget, a couple of things that I should remind you. You all know, you have done doing economics, and some of you are exposed to, all of you are exposed to the basic macro. Budget making is always a very tight rope exercise, because ultimately at the end of the day, the revenue plus net borrowing has to be equal to the expenditure, broadly speaking. Okay? So when we pay taxes, we feel aggrieved, but when we benefit from government expenditure, we feel delighted. So a budget, by definition, cannot appease each and every one of us and each and every section of the population. It's by definition. So when you are assessing budget, it depends on where are you exactly located, what's your aspiration, and which aspect of the budget that you are looking at. The secondly, when you are talking about fiscal consolidation, you see there are three layers of the government. It's a federal country, like center, state, and the local bodies. So when you are talking about fiscal deficit, you have to really have an aggregate picture that is indicated in the national income accounting. So union budget is only a part of the total. Union budget fiscal deficit is only a part of the total fiscal deficit of the country. Right? So what you get, the G minus T from the national income accounting identity, is not the fiscal deficit that the union budget represents. Now, in terms of fiscal consolidation, I think some of you would be acquainted with the role of fiscal deficit in the economy, and it's very contested. How do you look at the debt sustainability, the role of fiscal deficit, and how do you measure the debt sustainability? I'm not getting into all those debates because you're exposed. But in terms of fiscal deficit, the government has done well, because now the fiscal deficit envisaged in the budget for 24-25 is only 5.1% of GDP. The revised was 5.8%, so there has been a significant reduction in terms of the GDP. Revenue deficit, which was the actual was 2.9, revised was 2.8 last year, 23-24, but what is budgeted for is only 2% fiscal deficit. Similarly, there is also an improvement in the primary deficit. Now, all these deficits have got different implications for aggregate demand and debt sustainability. This is not the time for me to get into this. You all do in basic macro. But in order to, just to remind you that the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, and that envisages 3% of fiscal deficit. Right? Fiscal deficit should be 3% of GDP. Now, how fiscal deficit and revenue deficit are related? Fiscal deficit is equal to revenue deficit plus capital outlay. So when you're saying fiscal deficit has to be 3% of GDP, revenue deficit has to be 0, what does it mean? It means 3% of GDP, that's the net borrowing fiscal deficit, should be dedicated for capital expenditure or capital outlay, right? So when we have 2% revenue deficit and 5.1% of fiscal deficit, that means nearly 40% or less than 40% of our borrowing is still financing the revenue deficit. Now, as rightly pointed out by Nithalji, capital expenditure is all good, but in a country like this, curtailment in revenue expenditure is not all that desirable because it has to do with the functioning of the very public system delivery, right? So it has to be kept in mind that debt to GDP ratio is supposed to come down. So we have been talking about crowding in. In an IIFT model, what happens, we talk about crowding out because the LM curve is nearly positively slope. In practice, if money supply is endogenously determined, then you have got a nearly flat LM curve. So the crowding in is there, right? But when you are talking about the crowding in, you have to have a disaggregated picture of the corporate sector investment. That means when we are spending on infrastructure, so those part of the private sector who stand to gain from the creation of the infrastructure, the expenditure on infrastructure, they do very well. But the FMCG, the other part of the corporate sector, when they are catering to the demand, there is a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of doubt here. Why I'm saying so, what I gather from the data, that the consumption GDP ratio has remained stagnant during this problem. Investment to GDP ratio has also remained stagnant. The wages, the real wages, have actually remained very stagnant. Right? I mean, I'm not saying it has fallen, it has remained stagnant. Employment has increased. So the consumption demand is not adequate right at this moment. As rightly pointed out by Srivastavaji, we have to look at the labor market structure here. The service sector, the labor market, they are linked. The informal sector or unorganized sector, they are not the same, but informal sector, there's a significant overlap between the two. The informal sector is almost around 88 to 90%. So a significant part of the labor force are earning very, very inadequately. So when you are talking about growth, you have to also look at who are the beneficiaries of growth, whether it is percolating down to the masses. But the data indicates that the share of profit might be going up, and if you expect the share of consumption in GDP or a significant chunk of the population are not that experiencing a significant growth in the income, then what happens to the multiplier? In the simple multiplier, what you do, you write only marginal propensity to save in the denominator, right? I by S, and then you have got the tax rate is a little bit complicated and all. We don't talk about distribution of income and its impact on the saving propensity. So if you assume two different marginal propensity to consume of the capitalist class, the rich, privileged, and a high MPC for the majority of the population, if you have income shifting, now we have started talking about whether the multiplier would witness a slight fall. So on the numerator, the crowding in is going to operate because the repo rate might remain stable for the next couple of years if inflation is not going to be a major concern. Then the demand, the inequality that is rising, that is getting accentuated in the economy might affect demand. Not the overall demand, it might, but the composition of demand. So the macro, or the kind of macro that we do, is actually does not reveal the kind of macro that you do does not reveal the income inequality or does not give us a disaggregated picture, the simple macro that you do. Unless you have got a very sophisticated macro model, you are not going to get a complete picture of how different sectors of the population are getting affected by the G, by the I, and who all constitute the C, right? So the disaggregated picture unless we get a disaggregate picture, in a country of 1.4 billion, you will not get a true picture from a mere macro. You have to go deeper. You have to have a class-wise analysis, sector-wise analysis to look at it. So let me stop here about the fiscal consolidation. I'm not getting into the debate of debt and debt GDP ratio, how is it measured, but you know the DOMA condition, the debt sustainability, G minus R. Right? So if R is the rate of interest on the accumulated debt, if that remains the same, or it falls and G is higher, so the debt sustainability is going to be maintained, or the debt to GDP ratio may not be a long-term problem. Let me come to the second part of my talk, the idea of Dixit. What is the idea of development? See, the idea of development is very, very important. Whenever we are talking about the $1 trillion economy, third largest, eighth largest, 5 trillion, 8 trillion, whatever we are talking about. Srivastavaji also mentioned about the GDP, whether it's a good indicator of development and all. But just to remind you, Vishwajit also talked about the distinction between growth and development, right? So put them all together. What is the picture? The picture is, what is your concept of development? Amartya Sen has talked about development as freedom. That is, that we are empowered to choose the life trajectory that we want, that we desire. That is very, very important. That is one concept of development. There's another concept of growth and development is there. It's slightly mixed. It's called humane growth. Human in the sense, it's an equitable growth. But the third component is very important. The third component is how life is fulfilling for you. The pleasure. You are watching cinema, the art and culture, you are reading a good books, you appreciate life. You are fascinated by the world is full of magic things, right? You are fascinated by the magic of life. All those things, because we don't live by bread alone, all these things constitute your fulfillment of life. That is also one concept. So what is your target? I'm just wondering whether the target could be also in terms of the human development indicator rather than GDP. Whether the target should also talk about reduction in income inequality and improvement in quality of life, where the freedom of expression and freedom in every sphere of life would be respected. Now, what we see here, that there has been an emphasis over the years. I'm not talking about this last 9.5 years, talking about the UPA 1, UPA 2, and the before NDA also. The expenditure on social sector has not really empowered the masses, both in education and life. So we are really, I feel good when we drive the highways, the Vande Bharat, the wonderful infrastructure that we are having. We're going to have Olympics also sooner or later in the country. But when you are talking about development which is inclusive, which is equitable, which is truly empowering us, you can't afford to ignore your expenditure on social sector, because the human capital that is formed, education and health, are embedded in us, is embodied in us, right? So that is the beginning of the concept of development, but that is very, very difficult. Even Douglas North, I'm not going to elaborate, some of you might have read Douglas North. He doesn't talk about education per se, but he's talking about how learning is important. So three things that he says, Douglas North, the Nobel Prize winning economist. First is the quality and quantity of skill that we possess, right? Human resources, already been referred to. The second condition is the stock of knowledge that we have acquired. And the third is the institutional functioning, which create incentive in the society, right? So institutional functioning is actually clubbed as an institutional economist, is extremely important. And what you can see here, that institutional functioning and our conduct, which is informed by our learning, is so important. And it's such a broad Douglas North. I really liked his writing, that he is not completely focused on, we call it the institutional economics, but when he is talking about learning, he's also talking about genetic disposition, the culture, the social norms, and then learning to make us what we are or what we become. Now, with the GDP, I'm not getting into all these things. I mean, you know the pitfalls of GDP, but what I wanted to emphasize here, that the per capita income is actually $2,600, and the per capita income in terms of rupees in current is 1,70,000. But look at the India's position in the global. That's important because you have to talk in terms of per capita income. You have to talk in terms of equality, not the average, but some measure of Guineas or whatever, some measure of inequality. Where are we placed? In terms of per capita income, we are 143rd position out of 195 countries. And in terms of Human Development Index, we are 132nd out of 191, right? So whenever we are talking about Viksit Bharat, we have to talk about each and every citizen in the country. We have to really talk about per capita income with adequate emphasis or importance given to inequality, reduction in the inequality in the distribution of income. Because inequality, if it gets further accentuated, it's getting accentuated, you know, it has to do with the social order, the political order, the democratic functioning of the system that we are talking about. Now, let me come to the last part of my brief talk. What are we doing for education? Already been mentioned some of the things. See, the national education policy is actually a part of the economic policy. The major challenge for the government is to deal with the underemployment and unemployment. Unemployment in terms of data is not very high, but it's a question of mismatch between the skill that we have and the skill that is in demand. Even within the engineering, you have a mismatch, right? So overall, we can truly participate in the growth process if we are empowered with the necessary skill. And that will be the key to achieve inclusive growth. Unless we participate in the growth and earn adequately for our livelihood, it's impossible, right? Otherwise, the growth will be distorted and skewed, and all of us will not benefit from the growth process. So what does national education policy do? The major focus is, as I understand, it's a very student-centric, is the academic bank of credit. And that's very important. The tremendous emphasis on skill, national credit framework, higher education qualification framework. I'm not going to get into this. I was looking at the budget yesterday for higher education. Now, the debate is that the higher education budget for UGC has been drastically cut by 61%. I'm from a central university. You get fund from a different ministry. So we were very worried. So when I looked at the budget, the higher education budget in the total is going to rise by 8%, which is barely above the real growth. So in terms of the per capita and all, it's not going to be very high. But what are the four different components of budget? Because budget is an intent, as rightly pointed out, right? The budget is an exhibition of intent. So what are the different components of budget for higher education that get adequate importance? Number one is the increase in budget for the world-class university. So we have separated out some universities, 10 in the public, 10 in the private, supposed to feature in the world ranking of universities. And then you have internationalization, which is slightly different from globalization. And internationalization, not only world-class university, we are going to also raise the budget for scheme for promotion of academic research and collaboration that is across the border, across the international border. Then there is an increase in the budget for digitization, research and innovation, Center for Excellence in Artificial Intelligence. So some of these are sectors which get priority, but if you look at the budget for other than central university, IITs, IIM, ISER, and triple ITs, IIT, ISER, they're going to have marginal increase in the budget, 6% and 5% respectively. But for IIM and triple ITs, there is a fall in the budget. And then the drastic increase in the budget for the digital university. I mean, you can see the emphasis that is being laid on ICT. Now, whether it is endogenous growth theory or, I mean, mainly because of endogenous growth theory or human capital theory, you know that R&D is extremely crucial for growth. And how much are we spending now? 0.65% in terms of GDP. What is the global average? 1.8%. The budget says we are going to keep aside 1 lakh crore, possibly, I'm sorry for the number, I think 1,00,000 crore for funding research, and 70% of it will be coming from the industry. Now, in the overall, when you're talking about Viksit Bharat, we have to really take care of health. We have to take care of the school education. That is the foundation. If you did not have a good school education, neither I will be here nor you will be here. Okay. So when you're talking about school education, the learning outcomes are pathetic. If you look at the SR report, there is something fundamentally wrong with the learning outcome that you're talking about at the school level. There are pockets of excellence, and overall higher education scenario is also not that good. There are some universities that are doing well, but in India right now we have 1,113 universities, 1,100 universities, and in the world ranking we are virtually not there. You know, in the best, not within the 100 or within 200. So when you are talking about Vishwaguru, when you're talking about Viksit Bharat, when you're talking about the foundation that we need to create for equitable growth and inclusive growth, I think we need to spend more on education, more on health. If the foundation is weak, then the growth may take off, may not be sustainable because of the inequality in the distribution of income, but that would not be truly inclusive. That will, see, you cannot really separate economy from the society. If the economy is disrupted, social coherence will also get ruptured in a way. So GDP is fine, but we also have to start thinking in terms of other indicators. And development in human development indicators is very difficult because the progress has been extremely tardy. GDP growth can achieved very quickly, okay, but the HDI has got to, because development has to do with the institution, our attitude and everything. When you're talking about gender budgeting, I still find when you talk to the JNU students, how difficult it has been for them, the majority of them, to come all the way from a very underprivileged section of the society to do PhD. They are still fighting with their parents so that they are allowed freedom to do PhD and choose their life partner, choose the occupation that they want, right? It has been, because gender budgeting is absolutely a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. Sufficient condition would be to change our mindset. Thank you very much.
Very less than but still, I should spend 5 minutes my question and then I will tell you. You know, one couple of questions and none of you. It is basically center and safety. Now, what we have seen in the budget that centers transactions and transfer of funds to states and schemes, centrally relatively more loans, right? But if you look at, there are two things. As per the last finance commission report, 46% of the resources taxes to be shared in the state. What we are actually seeing that finance commission grants actually coming down. And second thing, government is actually bringing up a lot of space, a lot of charges, so which are not supposed to be shared. So as a result of that, the actual share of transfer has come down to 30. Now, if you look at the data, because India is growing, so the revenue is high. So in absolute terms, the central state actually transfers home, but we actually look at in terms of percentage. Is it good for the revenue? My second question, I think we be able to drive it. My second question is that if you look at budget and plan, 28% of expenditure is actually 28% of the revenue actually coming from foreign, right? And 20% of the expenditure is actually interest. So it's basically interest on the top. Now again, if you look at in absolute terms, you will see there is a slight decline, but in terms of percentage, it is very high. So you're wrong.
Professor, sir.
Before answering, how this happens. So again, I'm asking you to put your filter on, because it will not be reported. So for example, custom duty, they have to be shared between central government and state government. And what we did, every year we do it, is suppose duty, I'll take the example of say wines. So duty on wines was 150%. And it was to be shared between central and state. So what I did is I created a cell, AID, Agriculture Development. I say, okay, 100% duty will go as custom duty, 50% will go to AIDC. So importer has to pay the same duty, but the state will not get that 50% part. So this, the government says, nobody else wants it. I said, put your blinker on, and we will you. Now about giving less money to the state is more good or bad. I think I have no insight to offer, but for the past 1 week, I am reading about stories about how southern states, especially Tamil Nadu, their finance minister, they are saying they are paying for every rupee paid through taxes, direct taxes, indirect taxes, they are getting 1/8 rupees. I mean, 12, 13 paisa only. And whatever UP pays, UP gets 8 times of that. So UP earns less, gets more. And this, that means Tamil Nadu earns, and UP and Bihar they gain. So a lot of anger is there in southern states. And somebody is talking about separation, all the four states will come together, all those things are there. So these things, if you come out with a formula, I say 30% is good for state, 70% to defense and all those things. You can say 40%, somebody say 50%, we can fight on that, no problem. But suppose I say it's 30%, how the 30% is distributed? If that's not fair, like the case I'm telling, Tamil Nadu and all those, then it's a deeper problem. The problem that the anger will be similar. So we can decide it one number. People may have been not, but once decided strictly, then the most harmonious is
development depends on so all things are not implemented. State, remote or the geography is not easy for them. They need to do more, and the revenue is also income. So those things, nothing. So they need more support from the state, because when you're talking about India, it's a present country, all states to have, I mean, those parameters should be converging. There should not be any major differences across. That is not really easy to understand. I also got so it has to be ensured that the state has to pay, the state has to be provided with the resources. But tell me, what is the concept of government? I also find that without naming any particular state, naming the competent authority of the country is probably growing. Are you favoring some state in some particular political party in India? And you have to get the experience of the other state. Okay? So some big, I mean, I have to look at the budget. Some big amount, thousands of crores are being dedicated for some state. India is somewhat expensive about it. What is that? But overall, I feel what we usually say that the conversation to the state, it has to be slowed down so that we ensure a balanced development. We do understand. So, not an expert in financial, but there has to be, as you look at the recent numbers we want to look at it, but it has to be ensured because the state fiscal case, even as the GST, also is time. So, I need to have a look at that again. Not only one thing, interest payment, I think it's a necessary. If you have a fiscal deficit there, we are trying to bring it down to 3%. And given the fact, given the big question is that what is the extent of taxation in the country, whether corruption and tax money and tax economy all these are different concepts, but can we collect more taxes and still pay more? Can we use for the balanced budget multiplier and these are very sensitive things, but for sure, from my own subject, from long ago, the extent of taxation in the corporate among the youth teams is quite strong. And it seems like if you know from whatever institutions that they have, that not only the salary, but the youth income is a huge tax situation by basically one is the artificial extension of the cost and understanding of the revenue. The GST is supposed to tackle this, but it has technical support, but there are some important elements. So the interest statement, we have to look at the parameters. The sensitivity ratio is more or less stable or not. I hopefully because primarily has come down and interest is stable. Hopefully, still some kind of stability in the basic information. So interest payment is a necessary limit. As long as you allow for fiscal deficit, you can't get it. And also the 5% that we are budgeting for, the 5% that we have, it will also outcome of the COVID. Because that's when the fiscal deficit goes up and we could not handle it. So possibly in the future, but the need, I'm sorry, I mean, if you're talking about centers to state, you also have to look at all the states and evaluate what the center was achieving. If you're talking about empowerment, look at that is very big transfer. Money is being credited to the account of the various states. I will not mention any state here. You can anticipate the state that I have from, or the center. There are various states where money is actually carried into the account. I don't know who to blame, but this is also not really acceptable. Some of it is necessary, given the standard of living that we have, we need support and investment. But beyond the happy point, I think it's not done. I will not do this one thing.
You also keep your questions ready, right? Just keep your questions ready or once the
so I'm not an expert at, firstly, I'm not an expert in interest payments, so I don't think I'll go there. I wouldn't want to give a misinformed thought. But on the subject of federalism, and as someone who's very fondly studied political science and has also studied the way our civic structure exists for a while, I think it's extremely important for this one phrase that that has come around group, which needs to be applied across systems. So something that globally we've been talking about, or the SSBI, strong, sustained, inclusive, balanced growth. Like this was something which everybody was really talking about. And from my understanding of the political scenario in the country, I think it becomes extremely important to align the way both welfare as well as industrial policies of states and centers are going. And it should have some spillover, it must have some spillover effect across the way this confusion also is happening. And I think everybody sort of individually needs to take a look at that, really needs to take a look at what, as you mentioned, what development needs to be is important, but also what society needs to be. And what is the society that you really want to live in is also extremely important to you, because as a citizen of a democratic country, I think it is my right to define democracy as well, because the pillars of democracy again are based on federalism, are based on separation of powers, and it is crucial for individuals, for all, to really take a look at the situation and decide for yourself what you really think of this situation as a whole. Because everything that was stated by sir is also very true, that there is a lot of expenditure that central government is making directly into the bank accounts of people, which we were really talking about during COVID-19, where during COVID, direct benefit transfers happened into the bank accounts of people. And even now, that is something which the government constantly keeps really talking about. So I think it's also slightly philosophical and slightly self-oriented on what kind of country you want to be. And what is it that you define these tenets to be? I don't think I will be focusing on that thing. I think it's really up to an individual and defining how it is. One point. That thank you. The lot of funds are being transferred from state to state. But some of the states might be feeling that, if basically states out there, right, in terms of the development part, the state particularly has to. So it's basically a direct guidance from the state that I give you money on A, so you need to spend on A. So the states might be thinking that I like to develop to B, so I'm not getting that much of money. So if you look at the overall budget, the total transfer from central to state are increased. But in terms of tax evolution, which is the real transfer to the state to decide their development policy, that space is very increased. Okay, so with the new kind of federalism structure, actually, we have to have protect right and wrong. Okay, so now we can go back to the student. So we have two questions. One is radio.
Right, so we are quite safe. So informally after the event.
On behalf of the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, I would like to thank all of the panelists for not just sharing your insights, but rather posing questions at us. And I think that is kind of a lot of food for thought. I would also like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for Professor Naksar. Thank you so much for moderating the session seamlessly. I'd also like to thank the IIFT Economic Society as well as Praxis for organizing this event. And last but not the least, we'd like to thank all of you without whom this event would not have happened. Thank you so much. Hope you all have a good day. Thank you.
What's the meaning of class? What's the meaning of class?
यहाँ पे हीटिंग है तो
Okay. Huh?
I would now request Professor Naksar to provide the mementos to all of the panelists.